I'd like to address a claim that is frequently made by Christian missionaries. They ask the question that if Jesus was not the Messiah, how will it be possible for the Jewish people ever to really have a Messiah? Because there's no way for a person to reliably trace themselves genealogically back to King David, since all of the family genealogical records that were stored in the Holy Temple were destroyed in the year 70 when the temple was destroyed and burned. Now, at this time, we're not going to address or discuss the lack of credibility in the contradictory gospel records of Luke and Matthew that concocted a family tree for Jesus, tracing him back to King David. But what about this claim that there were genealogical records that were stored in the Holy Temple that were able to verify someone's pedigree? This is an urban myth. It's a legend. And there were no such comprehensive data bank of Jewish family lines that were going all the way back to the early days of Jewish history that was stored in the temple. As a matter of fact, at the time of the turn of the millennia, 2,000 years ago, the majority of Jewish people were not even living in the land of Israel. And even if there was such records kept, they would have only been kept of Jews living in the land of Israel, but the majority of Jews were living either in Egypt or in Europe or elsewhere, and therefore the destruction of those records would not have affected Jews that were living outside of the land of Israel. But the question is, how did Jews, and how do Jews today, how do we know what our genealogy is? How do people know who they descend from? The answer is quite simple. If we go back to the earliest days of Judaism, imagine going back to the days of Moses and Aaron. Aaron was the first priest, and all priests are descendants of Aaron. So how does someone know if they're a priest? For example, how would the sons and grandchildren of Aaron know if they were priests? They wouldn't have to go to some data bank 3,000 years ago and look it up in some genealogical record. Aaron's children were told by Aaron, "You are priests following in my footsteps." And every priest in that line would tell their children, "You come from a very you're from a very important family. We're from the family of priests, and it's important for you to know that you're a priest." And the same would apply to descendants of King David. Any person, any child that descends from King David would be told by their parents, "You know, kid, you come from a very, very illustrious family background. Your grandfather or great-grandfather was King David, and therefore you are in the royal line. You're in the royal lineage." And so we know our genealogies essentially because our parents tell us where we come from. Now, we know that there are many Jewish families to this very day who have maintained for their own records written family genealogies. These are called Sifrei Yuchsin, books of genealogical record. And there are many Jewish people today who are able to trace back in these written documents their family line all the way back to King David. And obviously, once you can go to King David, you can use the Bible to show yourself all the way back to Adam and Eve, actually. But we know that there are many people today who actually have these private family documents where they're able to trace themselves back to King David. Now, a skeptic could ask, maybe these documents are not reliable. Maybe there's a family that has some fantasy that they are in the royal line, and they fabricated this list of ancestors showing that they are able to trace themselves back to King David. It's a good question. And actually, the same question could be asked about the New Testament records. How do we know that those family connections were really, in fact, true? And it's a legitimate question to ask. How do we know that a written record is really truthful? And even a person's family oral record, the fact that a person says, "Well, my father told me that I'm a priest," or "My father told me that I descend from David," maybe we shouldn't trust these people. And that's a question we have to really think about for a moment. We know, based upon the final book, the final prophetic book in the Bible, the book of Malachi, the prophet says at the very end of the book of Malachi that before the beginning of the Messianic age, the prophet Elijah himself will return. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. One of the things that the prophet Elijah will be able to do through his prophetic powers is to verify people's genealogy. So it won't simply be a person that claims to be a descendant of David. And even if the person is able to produce a written document, we will have the ability of Elijah the prophet at that time to be able to, through his prophetic powers, credibly and authoritatively confirm people's genealogy. And therefore, the Christian claim that Jesus must be the Messiah by default, because there's no way of anyone today to verify their genealogy, is patently false.